Hello and welcome on Canal de English and the program The Forum. Today our guest is Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh. He is the chair of the National Democratic Institute for Africa and also the chair of the Christopher Fomunyoh Foundation. Today he is our guest and we'll be talking about this book. He's the author of this book. The title is The Cameroon of Tomorrow, The Man in His Word. The man is the doctor, and we'll be not talking only about Cameroon. We are going to also talk about his experiences in Africa. For example, the most recent case, the successful election in Burkina Faso. Please do not go away. Once again, a very warm welcome here on Canal to English. As I announced at the introduction of this program, I said our guest today in this program, The Forum, is Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh. He is the president of the Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh Foundation and also works for the National Democratic Institute in the United States of America. Some people refer to him as Mr. Democracy or Mr. Africa, and he's our guest today. And Dr. Fomunyoh, why is it that, first of all, a very warm welcome?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it's a real pleasure to be here, to be supportive of all the good work that's been done by you and your colleagues at Canal 2, to also have this opportunity to wish my fellow compatriots Merry Christmas, Happy New Year 2016.
Good. And the question I wanted to ask you before the introduction or before asking, wishing you well for coming here is, how come that, or why are you called Mr. Africa?
Well, I think it's a name with a lot of good humor that has been generated by a lot of analysts and journalists, especially within the international media, who appreciate some of the analysis that I do make on African issues, some of the positions that I take and that I make public, and a sense that I have a good understanding of the issues that we face as a continent, and also some ideas of how we could move the continent forward. So that's how that has come about, and it's a small title that I take with a lot of humility.
Humility. I wish to ask you this question because most intellectuals, African intellectuals like you, don't have the courage to say things in very simple and clear terms as you do. Where do you have this courage to speak out against some of the illnesses, some of the loopholes that are inherent in most African countries today?
Well, I could say somehow it's probably in the family genes. So I have to thank my parents and grandparents and ancestors for giving me that strength. But I also think that I'm fortunate by the nature of the work that I do, that I am not an intellectual who is just based in the classroom and who gives courses and lectures. But through NDI, I also have the opportunity to go out in the field with grassroots organizations, civil society organizations, human rights groups, women's organizations, political parties, elected officials in national assemblies and local councils, to be able to interact with them. So I think I end up with a wonderful combination, which gives me an analytical advantage point, but also gives me some very practical, real-life things that I can talk about. And when you are an African and you have this opportunity where your voice can be heard, not just on the continent, but also in foreign capitals, you feel an obligation to your continent to be able to speak up, because you speak up on behalf of the voiceless. You want to be able to use that opportunity to say what the ordinary African feels deep down, but that he or she cannot express publicly. And so I feel I have a sense of an obligation to do that for my people and for my continent.
Okay, now as we are talking about Africa, what is your take on what is going on in Burundi?
It's very sad because Burundi is a country that I know well, and I've worked on past political development experiments in Burundi. And this is a country which in 2005 signed the Arusha agreements that brought all of the warring factions together. And there was a common understanding coming out of Arusha that they would create the environment for a constant renewal of political leadership so that no one will be entrenched in power. And that will give a sense to all the contestants that there was hope in they making a contribution to their country. So 10 years after the Arusha Accords, there was an expectation that the country would be able to consolidate the peace that had been obtained through the Arusha Accords. And it's been very unfortunate that President Pierre Nkurunziza violated that accord, has sought to entrench himself in power, has sought to keep himself in power at all costs. And what we're now seeing is very tragic. We're now seeing people being assassinated on a daily basis in Burundi. We're now seeing the city of Bujumbura having people go around picking corpses in the streets every day. We now have hundreds of thousands of Burundians, refugees in eastern Congo, in Rwanda, even people leaving Burundi escaping to become refugees in southern Sudan, which itself is in conflict. And that's very telling of what's transpiring today in Burundi. And it's very sad because the country could have done well without this crisis. And
just to end up on this Burundi situation that we're talking about, are you of the opinion, or do you share some thoughts or some popular idea around that if Burundi goes down the drain, it falls back into a civil war, the sole person responsible is Pierre Nkurunziza?
Yes.
And are you of the opinion that the community needs to negotiate with him or use full force to take him out of power?
No, I don't believe that there's need for force to take him out of power. The end doesn't necessarily justify the means. I think getting him to relinquish power is the objective. How we get there is something that needs to be debated, and the use of force is not the only way to get to that objective. So, because force would only aggravate the situation. We saw what happened when a few soldiers attempted a coup, and how many lives were lost as a result of that. I think the objective has to be agreed upon, which is that ultimately Nkurunziza has to evacuate power so that Burundi as a country and Burundians can return to the spirit of the Arusha Accords, around which everybody was in agreement. And if that happens, then they can find a way to put in place new leadership, which may even come from his political party. But I think as long as he wants to personally stay in power at all costs, ultimately he's going to have a country that's ungovernable. At what cost do you hang on to power as a political leader when your own fellow citizens are being assassinated on a daily basis?
Okay, just across Burundi is Rwanda. Yeah. Do you think that the fact that Paul Kagame wants to hang on to power might also produce the same result?
I think it's an embarrassment because there was a time when a lot of young Africans saw in Kagame someone who was disciplined, someone who had a clear vision, someone who was selfless in his service and who wanted so many great things for his country. But ultimately, with the way in which the constitutional debate is being managed presently in Rwanda, a lot of people are going to come to the conclusion that, oh, he's not any different from the past leaders, including leaders that he himself criticized. And to have a situation carved out in the constitution of a country that says one individual can be head of state till 2034. It's very embarrassing in today's Africa of the 21st century, when many other African countries are making a lot of progress and creating the environment for a constant renewal of political leadership in those countries.
That's unfortunate. And let's stay just within the region. Do you think that the DRC is going to, the president of DRC is going to respect the constitution, or he's also going to maneuver his way and hang on to power?
Well, the Democratic Republic of Congo is a country that is extremely difficult, even in ordinary times, because it's large, because it doesn't have proper infrastructure, and the states or the regions that are out in the east or in the south are not necessarily well connected to the capital. There's not a lot of flow of information. There have been issues in the eastern part of the DRC that have led to gross violations of human rights. So even in normal times, the DRC is problematic. So you can just imagine what would happen in 2016 if the country were to catapult into a political crisis around the constitution, the respect of the constitution, and the fact that Joseph Kabila, the current president, ought to relinquish power, having served 2 elected terms as laid out by the constitution of the country. My sense is that the Congolese are very determined to have the constitution of their country respected, and that if the government respects that constitution, then the next elections in the DRC would probably be very peaceful. But if, on the other hand, Joseph Kabila wants to emulate what has been done by Pierre Nkurunziza in Burundi, then my fears are that a country which already has a lot of small arms in circulation, a country that already has a lot of citizens with grievances, is going to experience some very difficult moments.
Going to experience very difficult moments. And then across the river Congo, you have the Republic of Congo. Yeah. What is your take or your evaluation on the political situation there, with Denis Sassou Nguesso having changed the constitution to perpetuate himself in power?
Well, you know, I'm sometimes tempted to say that's a problem in our sub-region and in the Great Lakes region, because I cannot understand why leaders who, you know, on a cumulative basis have served for 3 decades. I think many Congolese who are 30 years old have never really known any other leader but Denis Sassou Nguesso, and who at one point was beginning to project himself as a statesman. And I think that having served cumulatively for close to 30 years, it's but normal that you should prepare the ground for the next generation of leaders. So I think what has happened in Congo-Brazzaville is also unfortunate, and it makes someone who at one point was being projected as a peace broker in the sub-region, intervening in the Central African Republic, and someone who could provide wise counsel to other younger leaders. That opportunity is being squandered and it's being lost. And I don't think that he's going to have the same respectability internationally that he had in most recent years.
Okay, and from what you've said, it seems as if there is a problem within the sub-region, especially Central African sub-region and the Great Lakes region. Is it that way of thought that inspired you to write this book, The Cameroon of Tomorrow?
Well, you know, when I say that's a problem, it's because, you know, when you travel through the continent, for example, you know, I just came from working on a number of projects in West Africa, and you look at West Africa, and for its own problems, you look at the fact that of the 15 current presidents in West Africa that are part of ECOWAS, 13 of them have been in office for less than 10 years. There are only 2 presidents in West Africa who have been in office for more than 10 years. That's Yaya Jammeh of the Gambia and Faure Gnassingbé of Togo. The rest of the leaders have been in power for less than 10 years. And none of them is thinking about tinkering with the constitution of their country to perpetuate themselves in power. And so that renewal of political leadership has given a sense of hope to young people that they have a future and that they too can aspire to having the opportunity to govern their countries. And for me, as a Cameroonian, I think that it is important for us to have a national conversation that can allow us to project into the future in terms of what country we would like to see for ourselves. Because once we do that projection and we dream of a beautiful country, a country in which each and every Cameroonian can make their contribution and be acknowledged for it, then collectively we can start taking steps that can help us build that better future for ourselves. Because if we don't even project, if we don't even think about it, if we all focus about immediate gains here and now on an individual basis, we're not going to be able to construct a united country, or a country that's doing well, or a country that's contributing to improving the well-being of its citizens.
Okay, I read your book and I saw that you have a number of topics, like you talked about political evolution, economic situation, the opposition and its future. Do you think that, because where I got attracted with 2 subjects, these topics was the opposition and its future, then the Anglophone problems of Cameroon. What made you to write on, you've written about a number of subjects in this book, to focus on the opposition and the future. Do you think the opposition has any future in Cameroon?
Yes, I think the opposition has a future in Cameroon, but the opposition must work for this future to happen. The future is not going to, we're not going to wake up one morning and it's happened. The opposition has to invest in getting a future for itself. Because we've seen in a number of countries where there's been a smooth turnover of political leadership. We just saw that in Nigeria in March of 2015, where the opposition came together, had a coherent message, identified a candidate that went through a competitive selection process, had a platform that was then sold to the Nigerian people, and that allowed them to convince the majority of Nigerians that they had a purpose in trying to win office. If the opposition in our country remains very fragmented, with each opposition leader thinking only about himself, then that opposition has no future. And we're going to keep having a multiplicity of opposition parties, and at some point, the people are not going to see a difference between these parties and the party in power, and they'll better stick with the devil that they know than experiment with something new. So I think the opposition has a lot of work, but I'm hopeful that if this opposition works together, we can actually have a meaningful turnover of political leadership in our country without a lot of violence and without a lot of conflict.
What will you say to people who tell you that, okay, Dr. Fomunyoh, what you have said is extraordinary, but the reality is that the electoral process in this country is fraudulent, that no matter how united we are, like taking the Nigerian example, the reality is that we are not going to succeed?
Well, I can understand their frustration, and I myself have identified a lot of weaknesses with the electoral framework. But I also believe that as a strategic matter, when you have a big problem, you have to find a way to dissect it and to tackle it in small chunks. And when you've tackled each small chunk successfully, then you can aggregate each of the small solutions to then have the big solution to what was ultimately a very big insurmountable problem. If you think that you're going to resolve that big problem in one tackle, you're likely not going to make it. So the opposition needs to begin to put in place a system that can ensure citizens, that can convey the message to citizens that they're pretty serious. And if they do that, then ultimately, when they put on the table the debate about the electoral framework, then they're going to have a critical mass of citizens that will say, you're right, because we can already see steps that are being taken by you to show that you are a credible organization and that we can entrust into your hands the future of the country. There are many countries that have gone through elections with electoral frameworks that were not very solid, but they have found ways to pin down the government of the day so that it couldn't fraud the electoral process. Now you can use new technology to make sure that people are reporting elections from polling sites directly into a central unit, centralizing those election results and making them public. It makes it difficult for an institution such as ELECAM to try to doctor the election results. We have a population of about 22 million people. It's estimated that we could have a voter rolls of between 9 to 11 million registered voters. But our voter registry has never exceeded 5 million voters, 5.5 million voters around that, which means that there are between 5.5 million Cameroonians who are disinterested by the electoral process for one reason or the other. Can we find a way to get these people registered? Can we find a way to make voter registration more thorough so that when these people all register and we go into an elections with 11 million or 12 million people who are well sensitized, this critical mass can make it extremely difficult for people to steal the elections.
Exactly. Now, there's another part I saw in another chapter on the Anglophone problems. Do you share the opinion of others who say that the Anglophone problem is really a threat to the future of Cameroon?
I am very worried about it, and I say so in the book. And I worry about it because, you know, when people want to be heard, it's important to give them voice. It's important to create an opportunity for those grievances to be addressed. You know, I was in the University of Yaoundé in the 70s when lawyer Goji Dinka wrote a petition about the Anglophone issue. And at that time, it was a simple petition, which could have been addressed as a number of grievances which could have been addressed. But what happened, he was, you know, chased out of town, harassed, and he fled the country. And with each passing year, because people have refused to tackle the issue head on, that it's continued to grow. And every October, there's, you know, some tension in the northwest and southwest regions of the country. So my take is that it's a problem, but it's a problem that can be addressed, and it's a problem that should be addressed so that each and every Cameroonian can feel recognized and can feel appreciated for the contribution that they make to the development of our country.
Okay, what do you say about some Anglophones, even some Francophones, who think, I think the SDF and the UDC of Adamunda Mjoya thinks that we should go back to the federal system In other words, the two federal system that came in 1961. Do you think it can be a solution to the problem?
Well, I don't think that it can be a holistic solution,
yes.
Because I worry every time that people want you to reverse to a prayer solution, because my fear is that once you revert to that solution, then the people who are going to want you to revert to the solution prior to the situation, prior to that situation. But if you are forward moving as a country, people appreciate when you innovate, when you come up with creative, innovative ideas, because the generation that negotiated independence for Cameroon is not your generation, it's not my generation, it's not our generation. I feel that we, in our time, as our generation, need to derive our own configuration of what we think makes sense in today's Cameroon. And we're all very intelligent. There's no reason why we have to go back to a formula that existed prior to our time. If in the debate it comes up that we need to strengthen the regions that exist, that we need to have a full-fledged decentralization, that we need elected governors, for example, that we don't need appointed government delegates presiding over the work of elected mayors and local councillors, then it would mean something to the 10 regions of the country, and everyone will be able to identify with the framework that is put in place. So I think that this debate needs to happen. It needs to happen in a very constructive manner, and we don't need a knee-jerk reaction that pushes us to what transpired in the past. We need something that corresponds to the times, that is negotiated by the generation of today, and I'm confident that we can do that. This
is a personal question I wish to ask you, Dr. Fomunyoh. Yes. Do you have any plans to leave the academic or the NGO world where you are navigating into and dive into the political fray of Cameroon?
Well, I think so far I feel very fortunate that I have this opportunity to be able to give something back to my continent. And I feel really appreciated as I travel through a continent that in every country that I present myself, people take me as one of theirs, and that I am very thankful for. I also try through the Fomunyoh Foundation, which is headquartered in Bamenda, to do things at the local level, mostly in the humanitarian sector, talking to young kids in schools, talking about the merits of education, the advantages of staying in school, telling my own story to encourage young kids in the extreme north, in the east, in Abombang, in Mayolo, in Garwa, that it can happen. If it can happen to me, then it can happen to millions of other younger Cameroonians. And I think these humanitarian actions, these investments in youth, and also making my views heard is one way of making that contribution. Ultimately, if at some point it becomes necessary for me to do more for my country, I think it's a civic responsibility that I would have to continue to take on.
It's civic responsibility. But to round off our interview today, I would like us to talk about something good, because most often people think that in Francophone Africa it is a regress of democracy. But you were in Burkina Faso. What was the miracle that made the success of that transition in Burkina Faso?
Well, Burkina Faso has been very impressive. And I should say there are a number of other Francophone African countries that are doing very well. I was with President Macky Sall of Senegal just a week ago, and he invited me as a special guest of what they call Université Républicaine, Republican University, which is in its 4th edition, where they bring youth from all of the political parties to spend a week just discussing issues of democratic values. And it was a wonderful experience. So Senegal is doing well, Benin is doing well, even Niger Republic is doing very well, despite some of the rumblings of the past few days. Mm-hmm. So there are a number of countries that are doing well, where there is political will, and I think that's important. And I think that, in Burkina Faso, we have a story that goes contrary to the narrative that some people have wanted to impose on Africa. Yeah. People who have said Africa was not ripe for democracy, that poor countries could not aspire to be democratic. Burkina Faso has proven them wrong. And this is a country that's still struggling with economic issues, but a country in which people are very attached to democracy and to questions of their liberty and rights. Okay. And they've done very well, and I'm very hopeful for the country's future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fomunyoh. It was an honor to have you here as a guest today.
Thank you very much, Elie. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I wish you well.
Thank you, sir. Well, that was the interview that we had today with Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh. Please stay tuned to programs of Canal de English Tomorrow is another day.